Cryostasis is one of the more fascinating horror titles I've come across. It comes from developers who are punching well above their weight class. Coming from Eastern Europe, it contains that signature Eurojank. While they aren't quite able to meet their high ambitions, Cryostasis is a fantastic, overlooked horror title. It has some interesting technology pushing features, even if they don't quite stick the landing. It has a couple of unique gameplay elements that help it stand out from other horror titles where your greatest foe is the cold. And it contains one of the more interesting stories I've encountered in a game. Not only the subject matter of the story, but how it's told through its gameplay. There's plenty of warmth and care found within its cold exterior. It may have some frustrating technical issues, but it's well worth your time if you're a fan of what I cover here on the channel.
What are you doing?
Cryostasis is an abandonware title. Why? Well, it released in early 2009, it didn't end up onto Steam until 2012. Then it was gone within a year. Why? It seems that there was a dispute between the developer action forums and their publisher, and they lost the IP rights. As I was writing this script, a fitting article came from the Video Game History Foundation. About 80% of video games released before 2010 are unavailable for purchase. That or you find an old copy somewhere, emulate, or pirate. Cryostasis falls under the abandonware category. If you're interested, you could download it from my abandonware. Cryostasis kicks off with a woman telling us a story.
Long, long ago, there lived a tribe of people in a place that was bounded on 3 sides by impenetrable forests, and on the 4th by the steppe. They were a strong, brave, and cheerful people. But evil times came upon them. Other tribes came warring against them and drove them into the depths of the forest.
We'll find pieces of the story throughout our journey. We play as meteorologist Alexander Nestorov. The year is 1981, and we're at the North Pole. He receives a message for a ship to pick him up at given coordinates. Instead, he comes across the atomic icebreaker, the North Wind. The ship disappeared in the North Pole in the late 1960s. From here, we head on board and piece together what happened all these years ago. Say the story goes in interesting directions is an understatement. On the presentation front, what's notable about Cryostasis is the use of physics. I'm talking about NVIDIA physics, the one with an X at the end. It's one of the first games to make use of it. The main use is around water and ice. They focused on creating water and ice that interacts with the environment as realistically as they could. I say could because, well, the execution isn't quite there. Cryostasis came out in late 2008, and major complaints at the time were performance related. You had a smaller studio punching way above their weight class with their ambitions. Hell, even on modern hardware, the physics system here still causes issues. By no means is my computer a powerhouse, but it would struggle here and there at parts, along with crashes if you're not careful. This is very much one of those games where you want to spend some time on PC Gaming Wiki, along with Steam discussion and guides to fix any crashes. So I could get the effects to work, but not quite as they could back then. Even with legacy PhysX drivers, your mileage may vary depending on your setup. As a result, some elements can be hit and miss, like watching water coming out of walls or pipe leaks. Something doesn't look quite right about it. It sticks out from the rest of the environment. There's plenty of fun to be had punching icicles. Not quite the same as punching boulders, but fun nonetheless. Although you'll want to cut back on the icicle punching once you get the water cannon, as it's an ammo source. I could never get to work quite well with the legacy drivers of physics, with the ice disappearing as a result on the regular. So even then when it doesn't look quite right with what they're going for, it still stands out amongst other titles. It helps give Cryostasis its unique flair. Save for a few sections or flashbacks, we'll be within the ship's interior. Yet it never feels static or repetitive. There are different layouts, and it feels like it was lived in at points. Plus, things are always changing with the thawing out of the ice in our environment. Cryostasis delivers on the audio end of things. What's interesting is how little music is present. Beyond the menu music, there's next to none throughout the game. The ship itself is the soundtrack, the humming of engines, the cracking of the ship. It does a wonderful job of keeping you on edge throughout. There are some notable sound effects as well, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's talk gameplay first. We're not alone on this abandoned ship. We're going to come across a handful of different enemy types. We do have a couple of ways of dealing with them in combat. One option we have for combat is melee. While it's usable at any point, guns become the focus later on. Something at first I thought was disappointing. I was hoping for a laser focus on the melee combat with guns being last resort options. But with how melee handles, I'm glad they made the switch to guns later. The best way to discuss the melee here is to compare it with the cream of the crop for first-person melee combat, that being the Condemned series. From its execution, to its weight, to the combo system the sequel introduced, for me, the Condemned system is the gold standard of how to do melee combat in first person. Cryostasis is a much simpler system, one that's rougher around the edges, one that wasn't the developer's main focus. Unlike Condemned, where you pick up anything in your surrounding environment, there is no weapon durability here. We'll get a lock and chain, a valve, and a fire axe. You could block, use the 4 direction keys for a different type of attack, and use the combo system. Hit 2 direction keys at the same time, hit attack, and you'll do a 2-hit combo. Simple. Nothing near the level of sophistication you'd find in something like Condemned 2's combat system. As well, the combat lacks the weight of Condemned. It's not flimsy, but it doesn't quite feel like you're making a strong connection. It's competent and easy to use, but not enough to carry a whole game. So about a quarter of the way through, we'll get our first gun. Something I'm glad they did, for gun combat is much better. There's a lot of weight to each shot. While ammo isn't a major issue, at least on normal, you still want to be careful with your shots. Reloading takes a long time. For some laughs, I love to use the signal pistol. Hit an enemy with it, and they'll keep on rolling like it's the year 2000 all over again. There's just something about the way they roll that gets me every time. While they're rolling, use your other guns to take care of them. There's a scope rifle, which is a bit tricky to use in close quarters. It's not like we have many stretches where we have long distances between us and our enemy. In my playthrough, it received more usage through no scoping, or when I needed to shoot now but was out of ammo with another gun. Another noble weapon is the water cannon. It's somewhat comical in how it deals with enemies with its weight. This depends on the physics settings. If they're not enabled in the correct way, it comes across like you're using a super soaker, like you're expecting them to say, hey, quit it, instead of falling over dead. Getting the settings right does look a lot better, but even then, it still lacks weight that I was expecting. I do question the decision to start off with melee and more or less dropping it. Why not start us off with guns the entire time? Or make melee more prominent with guns being a last resort? It's possible at some point development priorities changed. The end result is something that's a bit rough around the edges, but it is competent. it fits well with what they're going for. On the enemy side of the equation, there's a fantastic array that we'll deal with here. Things start basic with simple grunts. Then we come across an enemy who seems to resemble us. One highlight of Cryostasis are these encounters with these spider-like creatures. The further we get in, the more out there and interesting these enemies get with their designs. This gets more into Silent Hill territory with their symbolism. One of the more clever encounters I've come across in the game occurs when we have a combat stretch with enemies through a projector. I also have to note how comical fall damage is. Considering how much damage we could take elsewhere, there's great humor in how low of a fall it takes to kill you. One unique element of Cryostasis is the heat system. It serves as our health. The outer circle in the bottom left shows the heat in the environment. Red for heat, blue for cold. The inner circle is our character's heat. To replenish our heat, we seek out heat sources. Lamps, pipes, fires. Heat sources will offer various levels of heat. We can replenish our heat up to the level a source gives off. For a good stretch of Cryostasis, the most heat you can replenish will be about 3/4. It was so satisfying in the end stretch to find a heat source that was able to replenish your heat all the way to the max. When you're in range of a heat source, you can reach out to warm up. I love the sound effect they used for it. Makes me think of a sound a cartoon would use featuring Jesus when he heals someone. In combat, taking hits will reduce our heat. There are stretches out in the cold which will reduce our heat, and we'll die if we're not quick enough. While these sections out in the cold are few in number until the end, they do a great job of evoking that panic. That panic of needing to find a heat source and getting out of the cold ASAP. There was always great relief in coming across a heat source afterwards. Our level of heat relates to our stamina. Have low heat and run out in a near instant. Have high heat and you could sprint along for some time. It's one of the better uses of a heat system I've come across in the game. When dealing with a cold, it can be easy for a game to fall into familiar patterns. Stay out for only a limited period of time. Find places of warmth. Sure, Cryostasis does something similar, but with some slight tweaks. The tweaks are enough to help stand out from other titles with similar mechanics. It's integrated well into the game. Another mechanic that helps Cryostasis stand out is the mental echo mechanic. We'll come across many corpses throughout the ship. We could enter their minds in their dying moments and course correct their decisions. For the most part, these serve as short palate cleansers with some puzzle solving. Before using mental echo, you could use your surroundings to get an idea of what may have gone wrong. To once again note the stellar sound design, I love the sound of using mental echo to travel into them. Some of these sections are pretty straightforward. Follow some instructions given to you by others. Some are short affairs. Some last a bit longer and turn more into a trial and error affair. These are the exceptions and not the norm, although there can be some frustration as a result. Try to figure out exactly what you need to do, but you fail each time. Then you start again. There are distinct audio cues upon failing or completing them. Upon completion, we're able to clear something out, correct a wrong made in the past, and move forward. There are even a couple of cases where things get a bit outside the box, like using Mento Echo with animals. It's a neat little mechanic that not only keeps us guessing with what's coming next, but helps paint a picture of what happened on board. For Cryostasis has one of the more interesting narratives I've come across, both in its material and how it plays out. It does eschew some narrative techniques you find in horror games. They make great use of the mental echoes to help piece things together. We'll encounter various instances throughout the ship at overlapping periods to get an idea of what was going on with the crew. A captain that many began to question. Mutinies. Illness.
Attention! All personnel to the lower decks! Down! Move it!
We need to drain the water into the compartment. Open the door and I'll turn on the pump. Open it!
Beyond the mental echoes, we'll have the occasional flashback as we navigate the ship. They're more or less like Half-Life cutscenes, although we're an invisible observer. What also helps the narrative work is the quality writing, great voice acting, and the way the story is given out to us in drips. It's very well paced. So at this point, we're getting more into spoiler territory, so here's your warning. Remember back at the intro where we're told part of a tale by a woman? We'll come across these notes throughout the ship to give us the full story. This comes from the short story Old Izergil, written in 1895 by Russian writer Maxim Gorky. In a nutshell, a tribe is at war and flees into the forest. They encounter many difficulties throughout, with many dying on their journey. One man, Danko, decides to lead the tribe through the forest. While happy at first, the tribe begins to question Danko's leadership. As they continue, they grow more angry at Danko. Danko becomes upset with them, saying he alone had the courage to lead them, while they flock to him like sheep. The tribe closes in on Danko to kill him. At that moment, Danko tears out his own heart, which shines as bright as the sun. Danko dies, and the tribe is full of hope, with his heart providing the light to the way out of the forest. The tribe forgets about Danko altogether, save for one who stomps out his heart. Interesting story, right? So what does this have to do with cryostasis? Well, there are parallels to the story and what happens on board the Northwind. Through the mental echoes and notes written by the captain, we'll piece together what happens. The captain is such an interesting character. In our introduction to him, we learn about his stubbornness and drive as he makes a paper boat. It's such a great intro to his character.
Times change, but some things remain much the same. The ship must respect you. You must listen to her, understand her, talk to her, live with her one-on-one for many years. Then you become more than just a captain. You become a part of something bigger.
That's great, but isn't it just pretty words? Sir, it seems to me all you've got to do is hold on to the wheel. When are you going to let me try, by the way?
You don't waste any time, do you? Well, if you're keen, try this for now.
You can tell this game comes from Eastern Europe with the way it's written, and I'm all for it. The further in we get, we begin to see his orders be on the receiving end of questions with some of the higher-ups on deck.
My repeated appeals to the captain to deal with the threat were ignored. I further wish to inform you that the fact that the accident was not catastrophic was purely due to a set of lucky circumstances, especially considering the age and poor condition of the ship. I await further instructions.
Through notes we'll find throughout the ship, we'll get his inner thoughts on his actions. I have to know his amusing way of saying glacier.
Why won't this iceberg let us go? These thoughts have haunted me during the long nights as I listen to the mournful sounds of the glacier. Nothing exhausts the mind quite so much as dark thoughts. And so I was exhausted, but I finally understood. We had all stayed in our cabins. No one came out to greet it. We were all convinced we were going to get through. We disrespected it. We had no fear. And so the thin layer of our human knowledge cracked under the weight of nature.
The captain continues to ignore the advice of others, and the ship gets stuck in ice. Trying to ram the ship through the iceberg, a couple of the higher-ups on board try to stop the captain, wounding him in the process. As the North Wind is a nuclear icebreaker, you can likely guess where this is going. There's a great stretch of flashbacks where we see the effects that the nuclear radiation has on the crew.
Listen up. For nausea, around 1 pill 2 to 3 times. If it persists, administer 1 milliliter of 1 atropine solution intramuscularly. If you cannot stop vomiting, use 50 milliliters of 10% sodium chloride intravenously. Don't give them anything to eat or drink. Neocompensan, polyglucinim, everything we've got, intravenously, up to 400 milliliters every 24 hours. Now move it, we're running out of time.
Then as we reach the tail end, we see what happens with the captain. Wounded, they attempt to take him off the ship to safety, but at that point, nuclear shenanigans occur.
It shone like the sun, even brighter than the sun, and the raging forest was subdued and lighted up by this torch, the torch of a great love for the people. And the darkness retreated before it and plunged, quivering, into a yawning bog in the depths of the forest. And in their astonishment, the people were as if turned to stone. The brave Danko cast his eye over the endless steppe, cast a joyful eye over this land of freedom, and gave a proud laugh, and then he fell down and died. And his followers were so full of joy and hope that they did not notice he had died, and that his brave heart was still flaming beside his dead body. But one timid creature noticed it, and fearing he knew not what, stamped on the flaming heart, and it sent up a shower of sparks and went out.
It's interesting to note the parallels between the story on board and the one with Danko, and the areas in which it veers off course. Throughout the game, we've been fixing past mistakes made on board with the crew. Time shenanigans are present. There must have been something with this location and the nuclear element of the ship reacting causing this. In a way, the story reminds me of Signalis on that front, which, by the way, if you haven't played by now, what are you doing? Anyways, time to wrap up Cryostasis. And by time, I mean a final encounter with the god of time. He seems not to be happy with what we've been doing. Yes, the final boss of Cryostasis is with Kronos. No, not the Titan Kronos, not Zeus's dad. This is Kronos with an H. In Greek mythology, Kronos with an H is the god of time. It's easy to see the confusion. In fact, it happened back then as well. Some would consider them one and the same. It's an interesting final boss. If at first I was downright puzzled with what I was doing. Your goal here is to outscore Kronos as you take down spawning enemies. It was a bit unclear at first, but then I realized, wait, the score is on my hand. It's not a great fight by any stretch, but sure is creative and memorable. When we defeat Kronos, he gives us a few choices of controlling some of the crew that turn on the captain.
I was making it in my spare time, as if I felt something. Here, now, take it, Camille, send it to HQ. Let them disassemble it.
For if one falls, another will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, and hath not another to lift him up.
Hold on, Captain. I will beg HQ on my knees for this ship.
There, take the thing. It's not scientific, you know, but at least it works.
Here we could correct these mistakes like we've been doing throughout the game. So what happens then? We go back to the beginning of the game, and we see what our time shenanigans have changed.
Grab my hand! Grab my hand! Come on! Come on, grab! No! Come on! I'm the captain of the North Wind nuclear icebreaker. Welcome. You are lucky. The ice is rather thin here. You could have easily gone under. Well, now, no time to lose. Let's head for the ship. We have some rough times ahead.
Yeah, to say the story gets out there is a bit of an understatement. I mean, having the God of Time show up for a final encounter, that sounds like something you'd find out of a JRPG. And yet, for what the game is going for, they made it work. As strange as it may sound, it wasn't immersion breaking or took me out of it, which is a very difficult line to toe with something like this. Having the folklore story about Danko present made it easier to process and swallow. So what you end up with a story that's full of intrigue, great character studies, and psychological horror experience that pulled me in. To be fair, there are a lot of elements I'm not sure what to make of. This isn't a title that's had a dissection like games such as Silent Hill 2 have. The manual gives some information about the meaning behind some of these enemies. It's one of the games that's worth a replay to help piece together. And the end result, what you end up with is a game where the love and care put in is bursting at the frozen pipes. It's the work of a studio punching well above their weight class, especially on the technological front. It's rough around its edges, but when the game shines, it shines bright. The end result is a title that engrossed me in ways that few horror titles have been able to. Hell, most games in general. There's something about these Eastern European studios that can engross you in ways that few other studios can. It's a shame this would be the final game from its developer, Action Forms. It's a title that deserves far more attention. Yes, you may come across frustrations trying to get the bloody thing to work without crashing, but it's worth your time. If you're a fan of what I cover on the channel, Cryostasis is a must play. Just beware of jank and things rough around the edges. Thanks for watching.
In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow down, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look out of the windows shall be darkened, and the doors shall be shut in the street, when the sound of the grinding is low, and one shall rise to the song of a bird, and all the daughters of music shall be brought low.